There is a secret hiding inside you right now, so close to your own breath that you have overlooked it your entire life. Understand this. You have been searching outside of yourself for something that was never lost, only forgotten. You have been asking the world to hand you a life that the world was never designed to give. And yet the moment you discover what is about to be revealed to you, something inside you will shift so completely that you will never again beg, chase, or struggle for the things you want. You will simply become them. Let that sink into your spirit for a moment. Not chase them, not hope for them. Become them. Think about this for a moment. Every person you have ever admired, every soul who seemed to walk through life untouched by lack, unshaken by circumstance, radiant with a strange and quiet confidence, was not born with some special advantage you were denied. They stumbled knowingly or unknowingly onto the very secret you are about to remember. And once a person remembers this secret, truly remembers it, not as an idea to admire, but as a truth to live inside of, winning stops being an event that occasionally happens to them. Winning becomes their nature. Winning becomes the only thing that can happen because they have changed at the level where results are actually created. The truth is, you have been taught to believe that life happens to you, that your circumstances are the cause and your feelings, your identity, your possibilities are merely the effect. You were taught that the world is solid, fixed and separate from you, an external stage upon which you are merely a struggling actor with no say in the script. But this teaching, however sincerely it was given to you, is incomplete. It is a half-truth dressed up as the whole truth, and half-truths are often more dangerous than lies because they carry just enough resemblance to reality that we never think to question them. Here is what almost no one tells you. The outer world is not the stage. The outer world is the mirror. And you, my friend, are standing in front of that mirror every single day, wondering why the reflection will not change, without ever realizing that you are the one holding the expression on your face. Let this settle within you. Whatever you experience in your outer life, whatever relationships surround you, whatever level of abundance or scarcity fills your bank account, whatever health flows or falters through your body, whatever opportunities open or close their doors before you, all of it is responding to something. It is responding to a frequency, a state, an inner atmosphere that you carry with you into every room, every conversation, every decision. That inner atmosphere has a name, though few dare to use it correctly. It is called your assumption. It is the silent, invisible, and utterly powerful belief about who you are and what is true for you, held so consistently that it hardens into your experience of reality. Consider this. A king does not beg to be treated like royalty. He does not stand at the palace gates pleading for someone to acknowledge his position. His identity as king is so fully assumed, so completely inhabited, that the world simply arranges itself around that assumption. Servants bow, doors open, resources appear, not because the king demanded these things with desperate effort, but because his very presence, his bearing, his internal certainty communicated a truth that the outer world had no choice but to reflect. This is not merely a story about medieval royalty. This is a description of how consciousness itself operates. You are far more regal than you have allowed yourself to believe, and the kingdom you have been begging to enter was never outside of you to begin with. You must realize that imagination is not idle daydreaming. It is not a plaything for children or an escape for the unrealistic. Imagination is the single most creative force available to a human being. Every invention that now shapes your daily life once existed only as an image in someone's mind before it took physical form. Every building, every relationship, every business, every piece of art first lived as an unseen impression before it became a seen reality. This is not poetic exaggeration. This is the mechanism by which everything in the visible world comes into being. First, the invisible idea. Then, given enough emotional conviction and repetition, the visible manifestation. Feel this deeply. When Scripture speaks of the Word becoming flesh, it is not merely describing an ancient, isolated event meant to be admired from a distance in a place of worship once a week. It is describing a living, ongoing law. Your word, your inner speech, the story you silently tell yourself about who you are and what you deserve, that word is constantly becoming flesh. It is constantly taking shape as your circumstances, your body, your relationships, your bank account, your entire experienced world. You have been speaking a word over your life every single day, often without noticing, and that word has been faithfully, mercilessly, and lovingly fulfilling itself. Notice what happens when someone tells you they are unlucky. Watch their life over the following months. Notice how doors seem to close just before they reach them, how opportunities seem to evaporate the moment they arrive. This is not a coincidence, and it is not some external force punishing them. It is the law of assumption working exactly as it always works, faithfully, impartially, without judgment, simply mirroring back the inner conviction that was planted and watered through repetition. The same law that seems to curse the person who believes they are unlucky is the very same law that will lift the person who dares to assume abundance, dares to assume favor, dares to assume that good things flow to them as naturally as breath flows into their lungs. Understand this. The law does not care what is objectively true according to your bank statement, your relationship status, or your current health report. The law responds to what is assumed as true within your inner conversation, particularly the assumptions that are saturated with feeling. Feeling is the secret ingredient that most people overlook. It is not enough to think a positive thought once and expect the outer world to rearrange itself. Thought without feeling is like a seed thrown onto concrete. It has potential, but it has no soil in which to take root. Feeling is the soil. Feeling is what makes an assumption real to your subconscious mind, and your subconscious mind, that vast, obedient, and non-judgmental servant within you, does not distinguish between what is happening in your outer circumstances and what is being vividly imagined with genuine emotional conviction. Allow yourself to see this clearly. Your subconscious mind is like fertile ground that accepts whatever seed you plant into it with feeling and repetition, and then it faithfully grows that seed into a corresponding harvest in your outer experience. It does not judge whether the seed will serve you or harm you. It does not ask whether the belief is helpful or limiting. It simply says yes, and it gets to work. This is why the same law that can build an empire in one person's life can build a prison in another's. Though the substance and the process are identical, the difference is never the law. The difference is always the assumption being planted. Imagine for a moment what your life would look like if, starting today, you decided to end the war between what you say you want and what you secretly believe about yourself. Because this is the quiet tragedy playing out in countless lives right now. People affirm prosperity with their lips while whispering poverty into their subconscious through years of accumulated self-doubt. People declare love as their desire while secretly assuming they are unworthy of being cherished. People long for freedom while unconsciously identifying as someone who is trapped, someone who is powerless, someone whose circumstances are permanent. And so nothing changes, not because the universe is cruel, not because manifestation is a myth, but because the deeper assumption, the one running silently beneath the surface, is the one actually being expressed. This is why so many people say they have tried manifestation and it did not work for them. They spoke affirmations into a mirror while their identity, their true self-concept, remained unchanged and unchallenged beneath the surface. Affirmation without identity transformation is merely wishful thinking dressed up in spiritual language. But identity transformation, true and lasting identity transformation, changes everything, because your outer life has never been anything more than the faithful shadow cast by your inner self-concept. You are not your history. Let that truth settle over you like warm light breaking through clouds that have gathered for far too long. You are not the disappointments that shaped your childhood. You are not the failures that once convinced you to shrink. You are not the labels that others placed upon you when they too were operating from their own limited assumptions about what is possible. You are not your bank account. You are not your relationship status. You are not your diagnosis. You are not your rejection letters. These are simply the current outer expressions of a former inner state, and states, unlike identities carved in stone, are entirely changeable. You are in truth an infinite creative consciousness wearing the temporary garment of your current circumstances. You are the imaginer, not merely the imagined. You are the one holding the pen, not merely the character being written about on the page. This is not arrogance. This is not delusion. This is the recovery of a truth so ancient, so foundational, that entire spiritual traditions were built as elaborate signposts pointing back toward it, even as over centuries the signposts themselves became mistaken for the destination. Consider what it truly means when it is said that the kingdom of God is within you, not somewhere beyond the clouds reserved for after this life is finished, not locked away in a temple accessible only through ritual and permission. Within you, within your own consciousness, within your own capacity to imagine, to assume, to feel, and therefore to create. The very same creative power that spoke worlds into being is not distant from you, admiring you from some far corner of the universe. It moves as your own awareness, your own imagination, your own faculty to assume a state and remain faithful to it until it hardens into form. This is why persistence in the light of no visible evidence has always been treated as sacred in every wisdom tradition, not because suffering is noble for its own sake, but because manifestation is rarely instant. There is a gestation period, an unseen incubation, much like a seed that must remain buried in darkness before it breaks through the soil into sunlight. The person who abandons their assumption the moment outer circumstances fail to immediately confirm it is like a farmer digging up the seed every single day to check on its progress, disturbing the very roots that needed stillness and time to establish themselves. Faith, real faith, is not blind hope. Faith is the disciplined refusal to contradict in your imagination and your feeling the reality you have already decided to assume. The truth is, most people live in a state of perpetual contradiction. They assume lack while desiring abundance. They assume rejection while desiring love. They assume mediocrity while desiring greatness. And then they wonder why their outer life feels like static, like two radio stations playing over one another, producing nothing but noise and confusion. Clarity comes only when the assumption and the desire become the same signal, transmitted with such consistency and such emotional conviction that the outer world has no competing frequency to reflect back except the one you have chosen. Let this settle within you. You are not asking the universe for permission. You have never needed permission. What you have needed, what every soul secretly craves beneath its longing for external validation, is the courage to assume the identity of the person who already possesses what they desire, and to remain faithful to that assumption even while the physical senses insist otherwise. This is the walk of faith described throughout Scripture, the call to walk by inner conviction and not by the limited testimony of the five senses, which can only report what has already been created, never what is currently invisibly being formed. Think about this for a moment. The senses are not liars, but they are always late. They report old news. They show you the harvest of assumptions planted long ago, sometimes years ago, sometimes decades ago, sometimes inherited from the unspoken beliefs of your family lineage before you ever had the awareness to question them. When you look at your current circumstances and despair, you are essentially grieving over old creations while having full power right now in this very moment to plant an entirely new seed that will one day produce an entirely new harvest. This is where so many spiritual seekers stumble. They wait to feel worthy before they assume worthiness. They wait to feel secure before they assume security. They wait for evidence before they dare to believe. But this backward approach guarantees that nothing ever changes, because it is asking the effect to produce the cause rather than allowing the cause, your inner assumption, to produce the effect it was always designed to produce. You must believe first. You must assume first. You must feel the reality of the wish fulfilled first. And only then does the outer world begin its slow, faithful work of rearranging itself to match what you have already decided is true. Notice what happens when a small child imagines being a superhero. They do not wait for a cape to appear before they run through the house with total conviction, arms outstretched, utterly persuaded of their own power. In that moment, their imagination is more real to them than the ordinary furniture surrounding them. Somewhere along the journey into adulthood, most people are trained out of this natural, instinctive relationship with imagination. They are told to be realistic, to accept limitations, to lower their expectations so that disappointment will hurt less. And in doing so, they unknowingly sever their connection to the very faculty that was placed within them to shape their entire experience of life. You are being invited right now to return to that childlike audacity, not in a naive sense, but in a sacred sense, to reclaim the imagination as your most powerful spiritual instrument, to stop treating it as mere fantasy and start treating it as the workshop where your future is quietly, invisibly, and certainly being constructed. Understand this. Every revision you make in your imagination of the past, replaying a painful memory not as it happened but as you wish it had happened, reshapes not only your inner emotional state but the very trajectory of your future, because the subconscious does not file away memories with a clear label distinguishing what was literal from what was vividly imagined with feeling. This is why so many spiritual teachers throughout history have taught the practice of revision as an act of profound self-liberation. You are not lying to yourself when you revise the past. You are correcting the story your subconscious was mistakenly instructed to believe, and in doing so, you are freeing your future from being chained to a version of events that no longer needs to define you. Feel this deeply. You have far more authority over your life than you were ever taught to believe. This authority is not granted by external achievement, external approval, or external permission. This authority was placed within you from the very beginning, inseparable from your consciousness itself, waiting patiently for the moment you would finally remember how to use it. This is your inner authority, and reclaiming it is perhaps the single most transformative act available to any human being. Consider this. Why do certain individuals seem to attract opportunity after opportunity, relationship after aligned relationship, resource after resource, while others, working just as hard, sometimes harder, remain stuck in cycles of struggle? The difference has never been luck in the superstitious sense. The difference has always been the inner state being maintained, moment by moment, day by day, often unconsciously. Those who seem to win effortlessly have, in most cases, simply assumed a self-concept of worthiness, capability, and favor so consistently that their subconscious mind had no choice but to arrange circumstances that mirrored that assumption back to them. This is why comparison is such a spiritually corrosive habit. When you compare your current chapter to someone else's harvest, you are comparing your unseen seed to their visible fruit, forgetting entirely that they too once stood exactly where you now stand, uncertain, unseen, quietly planting assumptions that had not yet had time to bloom. Your winning season is not cancelled because someone else's arrived first. Divine timing, though it is a phrase often used carelessly, does point toward a genuine truth, that consistency in your inner state will always produce its corresponding outer harvest, though the exact timing of that harvest belongs to a wisdom far more intricate than your impatience can perceive. Let that sink into your spirit. You are not behind. You are not too late. You are not disqualified because of your past mistakes or your current circumstances. The moment you shift your assumption, truly shift it, not superficially, but at the level of your identity, you begin a new cycle. And that new cycle carries its own timeline, uncontaminated by the disappointments of the old one. This is the mercy embedded within consciousness itself. It does not hold grudges. It does not remember your failures with resentment. It simply responds faithfully and immediately to whatever state you now occupy. Allow yourself to see this clearly. The winning being described here is not merely about wealth, although wealth is certainly included. It is not merely about romantic love, although romantic love is certainly included. It is not merely about health, career, recognition, or any single category of desire, although all of these are included. True winning, the winning that never runs dry, is the winning of a transformed relationship with your own consciousness. Once you understand at the deepest level of your being that you are the operant power shaping your experience, every specific desire becomes simply an expression, a natural byproduct of that deeper mastery. This is why some people, once they awaken to this truth, seem to move through the second half of their life with a calm, unshakable confidence that mystifies those around them. They are not lucky in the shallow sense of the word. They have simply stopped outsourcing their power to external validation. They have stopped waiting for permission from circumstances, from other people, from society's timeline of what should be achieved by which age. They have claimed inner authority over their own imagination, and in claiming it, they have claimed authority over the entire trajectory of their life. You must realize that the world will always try to convince you that you are small, that you are limited, that your desires are unrealistic, that you should be grateful for less because more is not meant for people like you. This voice, whether it comes from well-meaning family members, from cultural conditioning, from the residue of past disappointments, or from your own frightened inner critic, is not the voice of truth. It is the voice of collective limitation, spoken so often across generations that it has come to sound like wisdom, when in fact it is simply fear wearing the costume of realism. The truth is, you were never meant to live a small life. Understand this fully. The same creative intelligence that formed galaxies, that choreographs the intricate unfolding of a single cell into a fully formed human being, that orchestrates the changing of seasons with perfect and unbroken rhythm, that same intelligence lives as your own consciousness, breathing through you in this very moment. To assume smallness, to assume unworthiness, to assume limitation is to insult the very source from which you were formed. Not because such assumptions make you sinful or bad, but because they represent a profound misunderstanding of who and what you actually are. Think about this for a moment. If you truly believed, without a single flicker of doubt, that everything you desired was already yours, simply waiting for the right conditions to reveal itself, how would you carry yourself differently today? How would you speak to the people around you? How would you respond to setbacks? Would you crumble at the first sign of delay, or would you smile quietly, knowing that delay is not denial, that appearances are not final verdicts, that the unseen seed is still doing its unseen work beneath the surface of visible reality? This is the walk of the one who knows the secret. Not arrogance, not spiritual bypassing of genuine effort and wisdom in the physical world, but a deep, settled, unshakable inner knowing that circumstances are not the final authority over your life. Your assumption is the final authority, and circumstances are simply the current, ever-changing report of what has already been assumed. Feel this deeply. The moment you stop begging life to be different and start assuming quietly and consistently that it already is different, you step out of the exhausting cycle of striving and into the peaceful rhythm of allowing. Striving says, I do not yet have this, and I must force it into existence through anxious effort. Allowing says, this is already mine in consciousness, and I simply need to remain faithful to that inner reality until it naturally, faithfully, and inevitably reveals itself in the outer world. This does not mean inspired action disappears. It means inspired action flows from peace rather than from panic. And action taken from peace is always more precise, more powerful, and more aligned than action taken from desperation. Consider this. Desperation broadcasts lack. Even the most well-intentioned efforts, when fueled by an underlying frequency of desperation, tend to push away the very things being pursued, because the outer world is simply mirroring the inner conviction of scarcity that desperation always carries with it. This is why chasing so often repels, while quiet, grounded confidence so often attracts. It has never been about pretending you do not want something. It has always been about believing so completely that it is already yours that the frantic energy of chasing naturally dissolves into the settled energy of already having. Notice what happens when you shift from asking, why has this not happened yet, to declaring quietly within yourself, thank you, it is already done. This single shift in inner posture changes everything, because gratitude assumes fulfillment, while questioning assumes lack. And whichever assumption you feed with your attention and your feeling is the assumption that continues to grow roots within your subconscious mind, eventually breaking through into visible form. You are not and have never been a victim of your circumstances. Let that truth arrive gently but firmly, because for some, this truth can initially feel uncomfortable, especially if life has handed genuine hardship, genuine pain, genuine injustice. This is not a dismissal of real suffering, nor a suggestion that difficult circumstances are somehow deserved. It is instead a liberating invitation to recognize that regardless of where you currently stand, you retain the sacred, uninterrupted power to begin assuming a new state, starting this very moment. And that new assumption is not weakened by your history. It is simply waiting for your consistent attention. Imagine for a moment the relief of finally releasing the exhausting burden of trying to control every external detail of your life. Imagine trusting so completely in the law of assumption that your only real work becomes the inner work. Disciplining your imagination, guarding your feelings, refusing to rehearse the very outcomes you do not want, and instead rehearsing again and again with rich sensory detail and genuine emotion the reality you have chosen to claim as already yours. This is not passive. This is the most active, most disciplined spiritual practice available to a human being, because it requires you to consistently choose your inner state regardless of what the outer world is currently reporting. This is why the ancient scriptures so often speak of renewing the mind. Not renewing your circumstances first, but renewing your mind first, trusting that circumstances will follow the renewed mind the way shadows follow the body that casts them. You have spent years, perhaps decades, unconsciously renewing your mind toward limitation, toward doubt, toward the belief that good things happen to other people but rarely to you. That pattern, however long it has been running, is not permanent. It was learned, which means it can be unlearned, and something new, something aligned with your true creative nature, can be learned in its place. Let this settle within you fully. The secret you have been longing to discover has never been hidden in a distant temple, in a rare book, in a teacher who charges a fortune for exclusive access. It has been living quietly within your own consciousness this entire time, patiently waiting for you to stop searching outward and finally turn your attention inward. You are the dreamer of your own life. You are the imaginer whose sustained impressions eventually harden into experienced fact. You are not separate from the creative power you have been praying to. You are its living expression, its instrument, its very voice speaking new realities into being with every assumption you hold with feeling and persistence. There is one more layer to this secret, and it is the layer that most people never reach because it requires a kind of honesty that the ego resists. That layer is this: you cannot hold two conflicting assumptions and expect a clear result. You cannot assume abundance while secretly assuming that money is dangerous, that wealthy people are corrupt, that wanting more than enough is somehow selfish or unspiritual. You cannot assume a loving partnership while secretly assuming that you are too difficult to love, that intimacy always ends in abandonment, that you must earn affection through suffering. These hidden contradictory assumptions are often inherited, absorbed in childhood from the emotional atmosphere of your household long before you had the discernment to question them. And because they were absorbed so early, they often masquerade as simple fact rather than as belief, which is precisely why they remain so powerful and so unexamined. Consider this. A person can spend years praying for financial breakthrough while an entire unspoken family narrative runs quietly underneath, insisting that people like us do not get ahead, that money is always tight, that security is a luxury reserved for other families. No amount of surface-level affirmation can override an assumption held at that depth unless it is consciously identified, gently confronted, and deliberately replaced. This is the true inner work, not simply reciting pleasant phrases, but excavating the buried architecture of belief that has been silently drafting the blueprint of your circumstances since before you could speak. You must realize that this excavation is not an act of self-blame. Let that be clear. You did not choose the early impressions that shaped your first understanding of what was possible for you. A child absorbs the emotional world around them the way soil absorbs rain, without judgment, without resistance, without the capacity to filter what is nourishing from what is not. But you are no longer that child. You now stand in the rare and sacred position of being able to look at the inherited soil of your inner world and consciously decide what continues to grow there. This is not about blaming the ground for what was planted long ago. It is about becoming, finally, the deliberate gardener of your own consciousness. Think about this for a moment. Every time you catch yourself rehearsing an old disappointment, replaying an old rejection, narrating your life through the language of what always happens to me, you are watering a seed you no longer wish to harvest. The undoing of this habit does not happen through white-knuckled suppression, forcing yourself to never think a negative thought again. It happens through gentle, consistent redirection, catching the old pattern with compassion rather than frustration, and lovingly returning your attention to the new assumption you are choosing to cultivate instead. Spiritual mastery is not the absence of old patterns arising. It is the swift, graceful redirection of attention the moment they do. Feel this deeply. The people who seem to win again and again are not people who never experience doubt. They are people who have simply become skilled at not dwelling in doubt, at not marrying their attention to fear the moment it appears. They feel the old fear rise, and rather than resisting it or being swept away by it, they meet it with a quiet, practice knowing, and gently guide their imagination back toward the reality they have already claimed. This skill, like any skill, strengthens with repetition. The first time you redirect your attention from lack to abundance, from doubt to certainty, it may feel unconvincing, even mechanical. But consciousness responds to repetition the way muscle responds to training. What begins as a deliberate, effortful choice slowly becomes your natural automatic disposition, and at that point you are no longer practicing the secret, you have become it. Allow yourself to see this clearly. There will be a day, if you remain faithful to this inner work, when you will realize you have not consciously affirmed anything in weeks, and yet your life will be quietly transforming around you, because the assumption has moved from the level of deliberate practice into the level of settled identity. This is the goal. Not a lifetime of effortful affirmation, but a genuine metamorphosis of self-concept so complete that the new reality simply becomes who you are, requiring no more conscious maintenance than your own heartbeat requires conscious effort to continue. Notice what happens when you finally stop asking the universe to prove itself before you believe, and instead believe first, fully, and let the proof arrive in its own perfect timing. This reversal of the natural human tendency to wait for evidence before granting belief is precisely why this secret remains hidden from so many, even when it has been spoken plainly for centuries. It asks something that the logical mind resists with every fiber of its conditioning. It asks you to believe before you see, to feel the reality of the wish fulfilled while the surrounding world still insists otherwise, to hold steady in your inner conviction while circumstances lag behind, sometimes by days, sometimes by months, occasionally by years, but never, if the assumption is held with true and unwavering feeling, forever. Understand this, and let it become the foundation upon which you now build the rest of your days. Winning is not something that happens to fortunate people while it eludes everyone else. Winning is the natural, inevitable outcome of a consciousness that has remembered its own creative authority and refuses to forget it again. From this moment forward, you are not merely hoping for a better life. You are assuming it, feeling it, inhabiting it, breathing it into every corner of your inner world until the outer world, faithful mirror that it has always been, has no choice but to reflect back to you the very identity you have finally, courageously, and completely decided to become.